Yes.
So we're going to talk about Presbyterian polity first, obviously. And I want to start by saying polity is a good tool, but it's not the only tool, and it's not a tool to use to beat each other over the head. It's a tool to use to help each other move ahead in the same direction. And that's an important starting point. I keep on my book of order, and I move from edition to edition, a quote that was from the New York Times back in 1977. And it says, "The worse the society, the more law there will be. In hell, there will be nothing but law, and due process will be meticulously observed." We only get to polity when we can't otherwise have conversations. And so I want to make sure we start with the fact that there are lots of ways to talk with each other. And we, rather than just saying we have to follow polity step by step by step. But having said that, now let's look at what polity is. So we start out, Presbyterian polity is how we govern ourselves as a denomination. And it comes from the Greek word presbyteros, which means elder. We see that a ruling elder, teaching elder, etc. And it's based on the belief that the term in the New Testament for elder or bishop is the same office. That's from a Presbyterian perspective. That's how we understand things. Each congregation in Presbyterian polity is governed by a session that's made up of presbyteroi, presbyters, ruling and teaching elders. Right? And it's also the idea that the power in the church is shared by these ruling and teaching elders. That's part of who we are as Presbyterians. We have a polity that has three key characteristics. The first of them is that it's constitutional. We have two parts to our constitution in the Presbyterian Church. One is the Book of Confessions, and those are creeds that focus on beliefs in the Presbyterian Church. And the other part is the Book of Order, which is the one we hear more of on sessions frequently, which focuses on the polity. The second characteristic is we are representative. This is what I love about Presbyterianism. It is the idea that we are governed by groups that are elected by people, right? No higher governing body can instruct a congregation to install particular people against its will. I can't turn around and say, I want you to put so-and-so as somebody from the Presbytery, I want you to put so-and-so on your session, right? That's your choice as a session, how that happens. The congregation is the one that elects officers who govern the church. The session is the one that's responsible for making the decisions related to that congregation's life. So it's very representative. And then the same thing will become true. Deb is going to talk about the different sort of layers of Presbyterianism, the levels that exist in the denomination. But it's also true that commissioners come from the lower levels elected to the higher levels. So the commissioners are elected by the congregation to be at the Presbyterian meetings that we have regularly. And they're the group, they are the Presbytery. People will often say to me, is the Presbytery coming to something? And when they say that, they probably mean either Deb or me showing up at something. And that's just wrong. It's not, we're not the Presbytery. The Presbytery is all of the representatives from all of the congregations. And what Deb and I do when we go into a church is try to represent that group best we can. But it is truly the congregations, the commissioners there, that are making the decisions. And commissioners are not bound to vote based on what their congregation thinks. They're not bound to vote based on what their presbytery thinks. They're bound to vote based on their conscience. So each congregation should be sending somebody to our presbytery meetings. And then the presbytery, for instance, we have Jeff Geary on this Zoom, is one of our representatives is coming here to go to General Assembly. And he will go to General Assembly on behalf of the Hudson River Presbytery. And he will vote his conscience, not what the presbytery thinks, but his conscience on various things. So that's a wonderful thing about who we are, that we are representative, right? That we choose people and then we say to them, go ahead and say what you and your conscience think is right to say. The third characteristic that we have is we are relational or connectional. There are no such thing as independent Presbyterian churches, right? We are connected with each other and we are connected through groups. The Presbytery, the Synod, the General Assembly. And so the structures of each of our governing bodies, our concerns and our businesses move up through these different levels in various ways. And we have relationships with various other councils of the churches. So for instance, Dorothy is on this call. She is the transition team representative, a coordinator for a committee on ministry, right? And so if anybody has a question about during an interim time period, for instance, the help comes from Dorothy and her team in that connectional way to work on those issues. So those are our three key characteristics, and it's what I like best about Presbyterianism. The creeds, they're all right. The other things, they're all right. But the fact that we are representative and relational matters a lot to me. We said that the Constitution has two parts. The one that we're going to focus on today is the Book of Order. It has 4 sections to it. The first section is the foundation of Presbyterian polity. It's basically says in a little bit longer way what I said at the beginning, that polity is not there for us to beat each other up. It's there for us to work together to find ways to be out in the world doing God's word, work out in the world. There is the form of government, which is where we're going to be spending our time today. The directory for worship that talks about criteria within worship of how to do sacraments and so forth. And then the rules of discipline, which are ways to handle conflict in a church. And they are being rewritten and will be being put in front of the General Assembly this June and July. And so the question, maybe we may have a whole new rules of discipline after that. So,
and Susan, that Book of Order is available online, right? Not
that Book of Order is available online. Any of you
to everyone.
The Book of Order. It's free. You go to the Presbytery denominational website and you can download it. And you can also, if you really love polity, you can also find online an annotated Book of Order that you can look at every PJC case. Those are our courts that has come up in connection with any of those sections. It's really good bedtime reading if you can't sleep. Annotated Book of Order. So what I love, as I said, is this representative nature of the Presbyterian Church. It starts with the idea that all church members are called to ministry, every single one of us, right? Whether you've ever been ordained or not been ordained, you are called to ministry. And that we have different types of membership in our churches. We have baptism, people who are baptized and are baptized members. We have active members. These are people that can vote at congregational meetings. And we have as well affiliate members. These are people who belong to one church, but are, because they may be, let's say, living somewhere else for a period of time, affiliate with another church. The last congregation that I served, we had an affiliate member who was living in Louisville and working for the denomination, and switched her membership because she was down there all the time to a local church in Louisville. But she had been a ruling elder for years in our congregation, and so she chose to stay as an affiliate member in our church as well. And when she came back, Evelyn was very involved in various things in South Church. So 3 different choices of membership. This probably will not matter to most of you, but the pastor and the clerk of session need to know who are in the active membership. So when it comes time to vote for things or be considered for roles, they know who's there.
Susan, a question?
Sure.
Can affiliate members vote?
It depends what we're talking about. Generally, if it's things like at a congregational meeting for annual meetings, the answer is no.
And can we say we've been pondering what Zoom membership means and what it looks like?
Zoom membership can be defined by the church, whether somebody can be a member. If you're asking by Zoom membership, if you're asking, can people who are in other geographic,
Scotland, yeah,
Scotland, yes. If you're going to have a way that they can actively participate in that congregation, then the answer would be yes. They could be a member of that church. We have, for instance, the Pleasantville Church. Its New Worship and Community is an almost entirely online church, right? And it's doing amazing things, and everybody is involved. And so there are lots of ways to use technology to have membership that's not geographically in your region. But you need to have the technology to do that. You can't have second-class membership. So if you're not doing things that are online, and it's really hard to have a second-class member who's living elsewhere. And that's why affiliate was created. It was created before the technology allowed us to participate by Zoom or other technologies in this way. So John Calvin, sort of the founder of the Presbyterian Church in the line of tradition, and he basically came up with the purpose of the church is to nurture God's people, right? And so the first question that anybody on a session should be asking is, how are we doing that? How are we making people who come to our church feel more alive? How are we making them feel that they're cared for? How are we making them feel like they really are part of a community where everyone loves each other and cares about each other and cares about what's going on in the neighborhoods and in the world? So that's our Calvin starting point. He wanted to break the distinction between clergy and lay people. And so we try to have, for instance, in something like a Presbytery meeting, equal numbers of ruling elders and teaching elders. On committees, equal numbers of ruling elders and teaching elders. So we're lucky that in this Presbytery, in some ways, we model this well, right? So Deb is a ruling elder in Presbytery as the general presbyter, and I'm a teaching elder as the stated clerk. And so you have examples there of not having that kind of distinction where one group becomes more important or has more power than another. He intended the church itself to have more lay people involved than clergy. And so if you go to a session meeting, generally, for instance, you'll see 6 to 9 ruling elders and 1 or 2 clergy people there, right? That's Calvin's structure that he was aiming for. And he created a structure with 4 groups of ordered ministry. We don't have 4, we have 3 of them. He came up with ministers of the word and sacrament, doctors, that's the one we no longer count separately, ruling elders and deacons. All of those are ordered ministers. They are therefore the groups that are ordained, right? And you will find if you look at the Book of Order in G20104A and B, it points out the qualifications for ordination. And we're going to look at the 3 types of ordered ministry that we have. The first of them is a ruling elder. What is a ruling elder asked to do? It's a ministry of discernment and governance. You are to govern your local congregation, and you are to discern the ways that that congregation is being called to be in the world. That's the starting point for ruling elders. It sets the policy and it sets the program for the local church. That's the main task. And we will come back and talk more about this, but this is in sort of a nutshell, the main task for ruling elders. Deacons in churches that have deacons, and not all churches do, but in churches that do have them, it's a ministry of compassion and service first. And we will look again at deacons and see how deacons function in congregations that have them. Third group are ministers of word and sacrament or teaching elders. And those 2 terms are now synonymous in our denomination. We've gone back and forth, and now we're using both of them. You can choose whichever you prefer to use. The starting point for all of these ordinations is that ordination in the Presbyterian Church is perpetual. So although you're elected for a term as an elder, once you are ordained as a ruling elder, you are always ordained, right? If you've served before on a session, so Mike Doran, for instance, saying he's been on session off and on before, when he can be reinstalled, but he will not be reordained, right? Ordination is perpetual. How do you get ordained? The process is you become nominated by your nominating committee. The nominating committee has to have at least 3 members of the congregation and at least 1 ruling elder currently on the session. And it has to have the pastor participating ex officio, right? The nominating committee that you're choosing should be representative of your congregation as far as age, gender, racial, ethnic groups, etc. And it is elected by the common congregation for those spots that are in the non-session spot. That group chooses people to be ruling elders, and then they are examined by the session, and they are either ordained if it's the first time, or they are installed if it's more than one time. And you are elected to terms when you do that. The Book of Order requires those terms be no more than 3 years, with no more than 6 years served in a row. Most congregations in this presbytery use 3-year terms. I know of at least one congregation that has changed their terms to 3 2-year terms instead. But generally it's less than 6 years is the maximum you can do that. And your groups are to be equal numbers of groups. So if you have 3 people, somebody said, well, if there are 3 of us, 1 in each of the 3 years of terms, right? If you have 6 people, 2 in each of the 3 years of terms, if they're 3-year terms. This is an ordination question that deacons are asked. And I wanted you to see it. Will you be a faithful deacon, teaching charity, urging concern, and directing the people's help to the friendless and those in need? In your ministry, will you try to show the love and justice of Jesus Christ? You get the focus of the deacons, right? The ministry of the deacons is really this ministry of compassion, of reaching out, not just to members of the congregation, although that's important, but also to show the love of Jesus for the poor, the hungry, the sick, the lost, the friendless, the oppressed, those burdened by unjust policies or structures, or anyone in distress. Deacons have a broad range of ways to show their ministry of compassion. And so because of that, the Book of Order allows that deacons may be individually commissioned or organized as a board of deacons. And in this presbytery, we have both. We have some congregations that choose to have a board of deacons, and they elect people for either 2 or 3-year terms. We have other congregations that choose to individually commission deacons to make sure that that role is happening. Right? In either case, their ministry is under the supervision of the session. And what that means is if we were to bring together a group of deacons like we have ruling elders here today, they may have very different roles. In some congregations, that may be their social justice outreach role is the board of deacons. In other congregations, it may be the role to care for members who are ill and provide services and food and support for people who are ill. In other congregations, it's things like making sure the sanctuary is ready at the beginning of a worship service and making sure flowers or whatever is on the chancel table is then brought to somebody who is at homebound afterwards. There really is a wide variety of options of how to use your deacons. If you have a board or if you want individuals. And often congregations will say, well, we don't have a board of deacons, but we realize that this piece of our ministry of compassion is missing. Let's individually commission a deacon or two to pick up that piece of work. And that's a fine way to use deacons, the board of deacons or the individual deacons. Questions for ruling elders. These are the ones that those of you who are going to be ordained or installed should be recognizing as familiar. Will you be a faithful ruling elder, watching over the people, providing for their worship, nurture, and service? Will you share in government and discipline, serving in governing bodies of the church? And in your ministry, will you try to show the love and justice of Jesus Christ? Ruling elders make up the session along with the moderator. The moderator is almost always the senior pastor, if there's more than one pastor. If there's only one pastor, the pastor of the church. Once in a while, that there will be an exception to that, but that's almost always how the session is composed. The session has the responsibility for governing the congregation, guiding its witness, and the way that it's going to be out in the world, and becoming a community of faith, hope, love, and witness. For most of our congregations, if you are a congregation, let's say under 300 people, the size of your session should be somewhere between 6 and 9 people. It should not be more than 9 people. Anything more than that is just problematic and makes for tensions in the session rather than working well. So 6 to 9 people working together. If you're a tiny congregation, 3. But for most of our congregations, 6 to 9, plus the moderator, which is, again, the pastor. You cannot have a session meeting without a moderator present. That's an important starting point. So you had a call actually yesterday from somebody that said that the group met and made these decisions. And it was a pastor calling. I said, were you there? And they said, no. And I said, you didn't have a session meeting. And she said, well, yeah, I'm happy with the decision. And I said, but you didn't have a session meeting because you have to have a moderator present for the meeting. So you can't act without your pastor being there. That's part of what Calvin is trying to balance in teaching elders and ruling elders. Here's whoops, went the wrong way, didn't I? Trustee duties, and I'm putting this in for ruling elders because most of our congregations have not a separate board of trustees, and so the session becomes the board of trustees. Each church hopefully has incorporated, if the state allows it to do so, and the corporation is made up of all active members who are over 18 years of age. Youth members under 18 years of age are not allowed to vote on corporate matters by New York State religious corporation law. But if you, most of there are bicameral boards where you have a separate board of trustees, but the bulk of our sessions have, a bulk of our congregations have one board, the session, that becomes the trustees as well. And so that means the session is not only obligated to fulfill the requirements in the Book of Order, but also to fulfill the requirements in New York religious corporation law. That means that each session should elect officers of the corporation. You should know who your president of the corporation is, your vice president of the corporation, your secretary, and your treasurer. The secretary is usually the easiest one. The clerk of session is usually the secretary of the corporation in most congregations. But the president, vice president, and treasurer may vary. You could have a chair of finance who is the treasurer. You could have a chair of finance who's the president. It really depends on your bylaws. And so you need to check those to see who your officers are in your religious corporation. Here's the important thing for being a trustee. So whether it's a session trustee or otherwise, the important thing is you have certain duties that New York State requires you to follow. You have a fiduciary duty of due care. That means you can't say, well, I'm on the session, but I don't have a lot of time for it. I'm not going to pay attention to what it's doing or what I'm being asked to vote on. You have a fiduciary duty of prudent investing. You need to pay attention to the finances. Some people say, well, I love adult ed and I want to go on session, or I love church school. I want to go on session to work on church school. I really couldn't care less about the budget. Well, too bad, because you're surfing on the session and you have this fiduciary duty of prudent investing. So you really need to know what the financial situation of your congregation is, even if your obligation is towards the church school or to adult ed or to member care or to anything else. You have an obligation of a fiduciary duty of loyalty. That means your first responsibility is to the congregation. It's not to you individually and what you think, but you are representing what the congregation says. Or when you speak on behalf of the session, it is to be what the session as a whole said, not what you think is best, but what the session as a whole says. So if you're going and you're saying, I've been elected by the session to speak to this person, you need to be saying what the session as a whole has said, not what you think is the best answer for something. That's your fiduciary duty. And you have an obligation of duty for obedience as well, which means paying attention to the laws and to being connected with others in your congregation and on the session and what they're asking for. So those are trustee duties. The third question that you're seeing here is for ministers, and that's our third type of ordination. Will you be a faithful minister, proclaiming the good news in word and sacrament, teaching faith and caring for people? Will you be active in governance and discipline, serving in the councils of the church? And in your ministry, will you try to show the love and justice of Jesus Christ? So ministers of word and sacrament or teaching elders are not members of a congregation. They are members of the presbytery to which they belong, in this case, Hudson River. So Dorothy and Jeff are both members of Hudson River Presbytery, and they are accountable to the presbytery, never the congregation. That's a starting point. We have a series of different types of ministers. We have installed ministers or temporary. That's the first category distinctions. Installed ministers are ministers who, when they're elected, are elected until that term of service over a period of years is terminated by them deciding that they're no longer accepting the call. Or we have temporary positions, and temporary positions are either stated supply positions or interim positions where somebody is elected year by year by year. We also have other categories. We have validated ministers. Validated ministers are for ministry like Dorothy is doing in Bedford Hills Prison, outside of a congregation, but where they are embodying God's word on behalf of the Presbytery in ministries of justice. Those are validated ministers. We have members at large. Members at large are ministers who were serving one congregation, have ended their service to that congregation, and are then choosing, are looking for another job, or for one reason are taking a break from ministry. They become members at large. And then we have ministers who are honorably retired. They've served for a long period of time or a short period of time, and they've hit a period where they're either because of age or other reasons, they've decided that they are no longer going to be practicing active ministry, and so they become honorably retired. So those are all the different types of ministers that you will see in any presbytery. Ministers have pastoral responsibility. And I want to go through which things fall to the minister. Ministers are the ones, not the choir directors, who select the scripture and the hymns. That's a starting point for worship. They are the ones that are responsible for the content of the sermons and the prayers. That's not the session. That's not the choir director. That's the minister. They are the one who calls for voting at session and presbytery meetings, and they vote at session and presbytery meetings. That's part of their responsibility. To be involved in that way. They are, as I've said, the ones that are to moderate sessions. Without a minister present, you may not have a session meeting. They are the person in consultation with the clerk of session, probably the most important role of ruling elders on a session is the clerk of session. They are the one to propose in consultation with the clerk of session, the session agenda. So where does the agenda come from? It comes from the minister and the clerk of session sitting down and saying, here are the things that I've heard from the various ruling elders need to come up at our session meeting or that I know about. The minister is the head of staff. If there's more than one minister, obviously the senior minister is the head of staff. But that means, who do the staff report to? They report to the minister or senior minister. And the minister is responsible for any weddings. And also, I should go back before we talk weddings, and that also includes praying for people. I don't have this down because I ran out of space, but praying for people. They have the responsibility for governance as well. And then we have a category called commission ruling elders, also sometimes called commission lay pastors. And these are ruling elders who have done more detailed training, who are trained and approved by the presbytery to serve in specialized ministries, sometimes with congregations in the role of pastor, sometimes in other specialized ministries like prison ministry or food justice ministry, or we've had a series of different commission ruling elders serving in that way as well. But there is this category. We have several. Deb, how many do you think we have commission ruling elders in a parishes now?
I would say 5.
Okay. So you see this more and more. This is a category the denomination didn't have 10 or 15 years ago, let's say, somewhere in there. It's a newer category, and it's becoming more and more important in our denomination. So you will hear more and more about commission ruling elders.
Can I just interject a second, Susan?
Sure.
And information about this to these this austere group of ruling elders is available on our website. It's very interesting. It's some study that you would do outside, usually Dubuque or some other seminary, and you can be commissioned to do work within the presbytery, which generally does include or can include leading congregations. So it's interesting. It's growing. It's also a place to just increase your knowledge of God and the scriptures. if you are interested in that. So just a little plug for our CREs that are growing and expanding and doing ever more important work in this presbytery.
We would love to have any of you that want to do it. So think about it. It's an important piece of ministry. So what responsibilities do the congregation themselves have? These are things that must go to the congregation rather than being done by the session or any other group. The congregation is the one that elects ruling elders and deacons. You must have a congregational meeting to vote on those, right? You can't have the session just choose to do that in the place of the congregation. The congregation is the group that elects at-large members to the nominating committee. And again, they have to be the majority of that nominating committee. The congregation is the one that calls through a PNC and dissolves the installed pastor's positions. It cannot be a session deciding to dissolve an installed pastor's position. The congregation is the group that sets the terms of call for installed pastors. So if somewhere along the way you change the terms of call of your pastor, you decide you're giving them a bigger car allowance or more money or a different housing allowance or moving them from one manse to another or whatever it may be, it's the congregation as a whole that has to vote on that, not just the session. The session makes the recommendation. The congregation must vote whenever you're buying or selling property. That's or in any way encumbering property. So if you're taking out a mortgage on property, or if you are giving away some of the shares of your property, you must have the congregation approve that. It can't just be the session. It is the congregation who requests the presbytery to dissolve the congregation as well. So we have this year several congregations that have said, we no longer think we're small and we're struggling, and we no longer think that we can continue to function as a congregation. Would you please dissolve our church? And that has come from a congregational vote to dissolve that congregation. Again, it starts with the congregation and works up. The presbytery is not by itself going to be able to come in and say, we're closing your church, right? We can do we can bring in administrative commissions and work with your church or govern your church, but the congregation ultimately votes to dissolve the congregation. So those are the roles of a congregation. Any questions on any of that? Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Deb for talking about the Connectional church. And Deb, do you want me to continue to do the slides, or do you want to do them now?
Since it'll take a couple minutes to do the transition, if you're willing to, that would be terrific.
Sure.
You just want to continue to do that. But are there any questions up to this point? This is a lot of stuff. I've been in your chair before, many, many times. This is a lot of stuff. Oh, look, James says, nope, everything's good. Fantastic. Okay. I'm going to take a bit of time to discuss with you the different levels, the connectional relationships in the different areas of the church. Connectional being the buzzword, being the most important thing when it comes to being Presbyterian. We are connectional. You'll hear that and see that all along. All of our governing bodies have responsibilities that are in common. So every one of your higher governing body reviews the minutes of the bodies below it. So if you are a clerk of session here, and I think there were at least one, maybe a couple, were there, Susan, a couple folks here that are clerks, were or will be clerks, you will be asked to have the presbytery will ask you to review your minutes. And the way that that's done is through Susan DeGeorge. Do you have one? You have one set up, right?
I do. So they should be, they are being paired with another congregation and they're exchanging minutes at the moment. And then in April, they have a clerk of session day.
And we must do the same thing, theoretically, on our synod level.
Yes,
the minutes of our presbytery are read by the synod. So that is one of the responsibilities that we have toward each other, our connectional responsibilities. The elected officers of each body, a moderator, and a clerk. You have a stated clerk, Presbytery of Hudson River, Susan DeGeorge, for what, 10 years now, been the elected stated clerk of this presbytery. And you all each have elected session clerks for your sessions. So whatever body is above or below elects that particular stated clerk for that, excuse me. The body elects their particular clerk for their council. The meetings are opened and closed with prayer. Now, I know from experience that opening a meeting with prayer is a good thing. It's quite common. Sometimes we all just vote to go home at the end. We are to open and close each meeting with prayer. There are two types of meetings. Oh, one more. Go back one more time. There are two types of meetings that you can have. A stated meeting. So you all should know, generally speaking, when does your session meet? Generally speaking, it's the first Tuesday of the month or the second Thursday of the month, or that. Those are stated meetings. They're scheduled well in advance, and you know about it. Everybody knows about it. A special meeting can be called. There can be special matters that come up, and the special meeting can be called. The business of that meeting must be stated. So in other words, you can't just say, we call a special meeting of the session. Crickets. We call a special meeting of the session for this purpose. And that purpose is the only thing that you can do at that special called meeting.
Deb, can I just jump in?
Yes, please.
The way you would do that is you would have two of your ruling elders usually. Your bylaws may say more, but if not, two, who contact your moderator, your pastor, and say, I want to have this special session meeting. All right, that's the process. It's not contacting the clerk of session. It's not just two elders writing each other. It's contacting the moderator of the session. Because the session moderator is the one who then can call the meeting. Right.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to talk about the three levels right now of councils of the church big C, the Presbyterian denomination, Presbyterian church. And let's start with our level, which hopefully you're a bit familiar, if not you are now. This is the Presbytery of Hudson River. There are approximately 170 166 now? Is that an updated number, Susan?
Yep, that's
wow. New. Okay, that tells you what's going on. 166 presbyteries across the country. We have experienced that with our neighbors. Our neighbors in New Jersey had 7 presbyteries in the state of New Jersey. 7. And they have combined and realigned themselves, and they are now, I suppose, as of this year, they are now 4 presbyteries. So this is going on across the country, where presbyteries are rearranging those geographic boundaries that were set many years ago. So they have to meet at least twice a year. Hudson River Presbytery meets, generally speaking, since I've been here, it's been 4 or 5 times a year. Has it been more in the past, Susan? Or is that pretty?
No, we had 6 up until about 5 years ago. We had 6 times a year.
Okay, and we are to have an equal number of ministers and ruling elders from all of our churches at those meetings, which is why in your session, likely it will come up who is going to be the commissioner to the presbytery. That's one of the duties of the session. And the commissioner of the presbytery, and it's based on size. You may have 1, you may have 2 commissioners, but generally speaking, there's a commissioner to the presbytery. It would be incredibly helpful to your congregation and to the work of the presbytery, your brothers and sisters in that body, if it were the same person. Often we have folks that okay, I'll be the presbytery commissioner this time. And the next meeting rolls around, I'll be the presbytery commissioner this time. That's fine. It certainly does work. But when you scaffold things, and when you're learning a new process, or when you're learning what the body's like, or getting used to the folks that are around, it's helpful if you can attend meetings for a year. Think about it. See if that can happen in your session. We have 73 congregations today. As Susan alluded to earlier, we won't have 73 congregations next year. So that is not probably surprising to you. We are becoming more compressed, I guess we can call it. Some congregations are merging. That's a wonderful thing. Some congregations are dissolving. You can see the map that's on here of our presbytery. It's technically 8 counties. We have really 7. There's one congregation, a small congregation in Columbia County, but we have technically 8 counties in lower New York State, the bulk of which, obviously the bulk of the population being in Westchester County. So you can go online on the Presbytery website and you can enlarge this. I don't think any of us can see this really, but you can get the geographic sort of idea of who is in our presbytery and where your congregation is there. The responsibilities of the presbytery is to its congregations. We can organize new congregations, merge, divide congregations. We can dismiss congregations. As you know, there was it's not very active right now across the country, but there was a time in our Presbyterian life when congregations were being dismissed to other denominations. That was a long time ago, but I don't think it's happening too often anymore that I hear about. And of course, we can help you deal with congregations with your property. And that is a presbytery issue as well. We are concerned with its teaching elder members, our teaching elder members. We ordain them, we receive them, we dismiss them, we remove them, we discipline them, on and on and on and on and on. And that is your committee on ministry. And we will talk a little bit more about that later. And of course, we're relating up the ladder of a very flat denominational structure, by the way. We are relating to the Synod, which we'll talk about in a minute, and the General Assembly. Next slide, please. Yep, one back. Thank you. Well, all of your churches have a calling, and all of your churches have a mission statement. And this is the mission statement of the Presbytery of Hudson. This particular mission statement is what attracted me so much to this work of the Presbytery. Remember, we're not a congregation. We are a presbytery. So we are a collection of congregations. So we are involved in the work of building partnerships between congregations and organizations. We are part of nurturing strong leadership, which we do in several ways I'll talk about in a minute, creating healthy, vital communities of faith. So these are the 3, what we call laughingly bubbles, because they appear on our structure as bubbles, but these are the 3 pieces that our presbytery concentrates on. And everything that we do falls under these 3 main pieces. We really would like you to engage with us. And there are so many ways that we do this. The clear one is in the Hudson River Presbytery website. I had that. I can't share that right now. Susan, no, never mind. It's too complicated. But if you go on to Hudson River Press, it's hudrivpress.org or Google Hudson River Presbytery. We have just redesigned our website maybe about 6 months ago, and it's pretty user friendly. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the screen, you'll see the beloved search bar. And that is what you can use. It actually works. I'm very excited about that. So if you are looking for some information, particularly Committee on Ministry information, where the manual itself is quite overwhelming, please use the search bar. It will get you where you need to go. We do have a Facebook page. It's a very, very active Facebook page. It is updated probably 2 or 3 times, at least in a week. And it will be the most updated piece of information that we have. So for instance, the last entry on our Facebook page was 2 days ago. and it was about Presbyterian disaster assistance and how they are working with the Ukraine and how your congregation can get involved. These are things that just happen between our newsletter, which is a weekly newsletter. I would very much encourage you to join the Hudson River Presbytery Facebook page and or my Facebook page, Deborah Milcarek, because that is where the most up-to-date information in the Presbytery will be found. And you will find lots of resources, not only on the Facebook page, but on the website. Our Presby News, we call it, comes out once a week. That's going to be your basic information of all the webinars that we're offering or others are offering, the resources around the country, around the Presbytery, events that are coming up, information that you wish to share on Facebook, on the Presby News. You will see that the layout is very distinct in that you can read one line, click it on if you want more information. If not, you're done. So you can glance at it once a week. And if there's nothing that interests you, okay, we'll see you in the following week. I highly encourage you to sign up for this, for Presby News. We'd be happy to add you to it based on, we have emails, right, Susan?
Oh, yes, we do.
Okay, we will be happy to add you to it, and then you can just delete us if you don't like it, but we will add you to the Presby News so that you're most up to date on the information around the churches and around our Presbytery. We have a new tool, and you might not have heard of it because it is so new to us, but we are gradually moving into this tool called Mission Insight. Mission Insight is an amazing tool that has been around for a while. It's now owned by an organization called ACS, which does a lot of church software, tools, components. Mission Insight is a demographic study. It's demographic information. Do you want to know who lives around you? Do you want to know how old the people are around you, or how young they are, or what the demographic trends are of your town, of your area, of your county? There's so many different things that you can do with Mission Insight. Susan, would you like to add to that?
We've had congregations that have now used Mission Insight, for instance, in connection to their Holy Cow assessment. So tomorrow I'm at a congregation that's doing their interpretation, and they've already asked to have a report run from Mission Insight to go with it, to talk about, given what it shows about how they want to reach out to the neighborhood, who's in their neighborhood and how can they reach out. And so it's a wonderful tool to use as you're sort of thinking, where do you want to be next as a congregation?
And let's, just a quick example. If you have a congregation who is surrounded by 80% adults over the age of 65, and that's the trend that they say is going to continue for the next 10 years, how is your preschool going to do? These are questions that are really good to know. It's information. Information is power, and it just lets you know God placed your church in this place probably a long, long time ago, and things have likely changed. So get an idea of what your neighborhood looks like, your neighborhood being the surrounding area of your church. Get an idea of what that looks like and help you discern, why has God called you today? Why is this church sitting today on this block, on this street, in this neighborhood? What is it that God is calling us to do? So it is only a tool. It's not change. It doesn't change the world. It doesn't change your congregation. It does provide you with information to discern who you are. And reach out again to Susan DeGeorge if you would like some more information on that. And what is connected? Go ahead.
Anyone, it's not just the ministers who can sign up. Members of the congregation can sign up to use it. So if you're working in a specific area, if you're the outreach person on your session, or you're the Christian ed person, and you want to know what your Christian ed program might look like in 3 years or 4 years, given demographics in your neighborhood, you can sign up and get it. Use our Mission Insight account. You need to give me it sends me a message somewhere within 2 to 3 hours after you sign up. So you need to give me that lead time. And if you sign up at 11 o'clock at night, you need to give me the night till the next morning. But then you're approved for your account. So you can use it for basically any area and any demographic after that.
Yes, and so this is not inexpensive. We would love for you to sign up. Because the Presbytery Council has approved paying for this for your congregations. So please do use this tool that we have. Again, it's new. That's why you haven't heard much about it, and you'll be hearing more about that in the future.
So
that is direct.
Carla has her answer. She put, how do you get Mission Insight? That's what I want to make sure she's gotten the answer she needs. Carla,
you got that? Just email Susan DeGeorge how we get everything in our presbytery. That's how I get everything. So Mission Insight leads me right into something that isn't now new. I don't think we can call it new anymore. This is called Holy Cow. It is really, truly called Holy Cow with an exclamation point at the end. That is how it is directly written and referred to. Holy Cow is an assessment tool. Fully half, if not a little more than half of our congregations have already done this. If your congregation has not done this, you want to do this. Holy Cow, it gives you a good read on who your congregation is. Who are these people sitting in the pews? Not the loud ones necessarily, not only the loud ones, not only the quiet ones, who is your congregation and what are they thinking? Susan, you want to talk a little more about that?
So we often hear, well, in the abstract, our congregations think blah, 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 and we have to do something about it. But we don't know if it's true or not, right? Because we're hearing it in the complete abstract. And so this really gives every member of the congregation a chance to have a voice, to say across the board, how hospitable are we? What do we think of our worship service? How do we like our education programs? What do we think our mission out in the world should be? So it's a chance. We bring in an outside consultant. We pay for her to come in. She will interpret that for you. She will work with you on what your priorities should be as part of that. So it's a tool that you can then use, and she'll talk with your session as well as the congregation as a whole. It's a tool that you can use to figure out what next steps will be to make your congregation even more vibrant than it may currently be. And again, just let me know if you want to do it and we'll figure out a way to get your congregation started.
And what would be the cost to a congregation?
If it's a tiny congregation, you do what's called the conversations piece. That costs about $125. If you're a larger congregation, and by larger I mean more than 35 in worship on a Sunday, then you do what's called the CAT, the Congregational Assessment Tool, and that's about $400 to you. But that's the small part of the cost. The Presbytery is picking up several $1,000s each time we bring in somebody. So
we are. So again, I hope you've heard of it. Some of you have already participated, I know, but it is a incredible tool for your congregation and particularly your session as you discern together. Another tool that we have for you that you may not be familiar with, we've had it for about a year now. It's called Practical Resources for Congregations. PRC, as you can see the website on the screen, PRC-LI being Long Island. It's a little confusing, but they originated in Long Island and they kept that as part of their website title. Practical Resources is the most amazing thing you could imagine. It has every topic in ministry, Christian educators, youth, personnel, finance, literally hundreds of webinars. Think of it as a big library of resources for any size congregation. And they also have many opportunities coming up. You will see those in Presby News when you start getting Presby News, but you will also see it if you visit that website We have become a member of PRCLI because it is so useful to our congregations. When you sign in, you're a member of this presbytery. You can utilize any of it and all of it for no charge to you. I highly recommend that you visit this site and see what could be helpful to you and your session and your committee members and anyone else that you might have that could use resources for congregations. It is a stellar site, and it is a wonderful opportunity and wonderful resources for you to use. And the only reason I'm bringing these up is because I have this opportunity with you to share about things that you might not have heard of before. And these are the things that are being used most in our presbytery today. I do want you to realize that as we talk about churches, that fully 2/3 of the churches in this presbytery are under 100 members. Please understand that. So most of the standing congregations are under 100 members in this presbytery. And these are the folks that we are trying to resource. And this information and these tools are the ones that you all could use. Next slide, please. Next level is the Synod. The Synod, it's pretty logical. Congregations make up a presbytery. Presbyteries make up the Synod. The Synod makes up the General Assembly. The Synods and the presbyteries make up the General Assembly. So your Synod, we have 16 synods across the country. It's geographic, again, as you can see. We have, how many? 19. You put it on there for me. Thank you. We have 19 presbyteries. Well, does that include New Jersey and their shift?
It's the new shift.
Okay.
They don't have a map up yet on the Synod of the new geography. So you're seeing the old names.
Seeing the old ones. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Terrific. Know that from Hudson River Presbytery down is the major population of this Synod. Hudson River, Long Island, New York City, and Northern New Jersey comprise the major population of this Synod. We do have, there must be churches up there in Northern New England. There are, but they're very far between. Lots of Reformed churches and Congregational churches, but a few Presbyterian churches as well. And there's an equal number of teaching elders and ruling elders that are in the Synod. The Synod is populated by the same logic as a presbytery. So commissioners and commissioners are elected and serve at presbytery level, whereby commissioners are also elected at the presbytery level to serve the Synod. The Synod has a website that you can certainly visit. The Synod has a responsibility to resource our mission, which I shared with you earlier. So the Synod's responsibility is to resource the mission of the presbyteries. The Synod is to be there to help us with employment practices, make sure that we have inclusive employment, PJC, permanent judicial commissions, the disciplinary action of the church can be through the Synod as well. And the Synod Council, of course, is composed again of elected representatives from each presbytery. And finally, we have the General Assembly. Wow. The General Assembly of the Presbytery. Now, when you hear General Assembly, when I was serving as a ruling elder of a Synod 30 years ago, the General Assembly sounded like a gathering to me, period. So it was a meeting, period, end. The General Assembly is the gathering that meets every other year now in various places across the country or on Zoom, as it has been at the last General Assembly and will be this year in 2022, sort of a hybrid General Assembly that they're trying out for this year. The General Assembly, of course, is responsible for maintaining the relationships across the world with various denominations, other bodies, other faithful bodies of people. You know that there's a stated clerk of the General Assembly. J. Herbert Nelson is the stated clerk of our General Assembly. And they meet again, used to be every year, but in the last 15 or so years, it's been every other year. And the General Assembly is where commissioners that are elected by the Presbytery, and I think Jeff is on here. He is one of our minister commissioners. Hudson River it's based on size. So Hudson River Presbytery has 2 ruling elders, elected 2 ruling elders and 2 teaching elders to go to, and one youth advisory delegate to go to participate in the General Assembly. They are your General Assembly commissioners for 2 years. Although they do attend this particular quote assembly meeting, they are your commissioners to the denomination for the next 2 years. It'll be again this year in Louisville, end of June, beginning of July, around those dates. It's rather spread out, and they will vote this year on whether we will be returning to in-person large gatherings that we had prior to COVID. So we have, once again, congregations, presbyteries, synods, General Assembly, and that's your Presbyterian denomination. Is there a president of the General Assembly? There is a stated clerk, much like we don't have a president, neither myself or Susan of the Presbytery of Hudson River. There is a duly elected stated clerk. Susan, help me out here. 4-year term, 7-year term? I don't remember. Maybe 4-year term I think it's. I don't remember.
He used to be elected every GA, so I don't know if that's changed. So I think it will be 2 years. I think it's 2 years.
The stated clerk.
Stated clerk at each GA along with the moderator usually, or every 2 GAs. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I'm not sure either. But
what is it, Jeff? Jeff just gave us the answer. What was
I think it's still every GA.
Yeah. Okay.
So he was just reelected, right? That last General Assembly for whatever term. It's a little bit more complicated, and someday we could have a webinar. I'm speaking right now to James's question. Someday we could have a webinar about the internal workings of the denomination, but the denomination is made up of several different agencies. And the agency, so you have a head of mission, Presbyterian Mission Agency, you have the Board of Pensions, you have the foundation, you have, was it Presbyterian Publishing? Is that one of the agencies? And then you have the OGA, which is the Office of the General Assembly. So the stated clerk is the head of staff of the OGA, but we wouldn't use the term president because he is elected as he is the spokesperson for the denomination. What else would you say, Susan? I mean, he's
right. And there's also each General Assembly, a moderator or co-moderators are elected, and they also play part of the role of the equivalent of president, shared with the stated clerk and shared with people who are in charge of different committees. So there's not a president in any way.
And so yeah, each of those agencies has their heads, their directors. By various titles, the Board of Pensions, the Presbyterian Foundation, which is the investment arm of the Presbyterian Church, et cetera, et cetera. There we go. Thanks, Jeff. Every 4 years. So he will be up. J. Herbert Nelson will be up for re-election if he chooses to run in 2024. Okay. I hand it back to you, Susan. If there's any questions, I know it's not.
Right. Does anybody have questions before we go back to session duty? I don't see any hands up. Okay.
It is quite familiar, the governing of the Presbyterian Church, isn't it? It very much resembles the governing of our country.
So for session duties, I want to be a little bit more specific about what, if you're going on to a session, your responsibilities are. And I don't want to spend, they're including, I'm not going to list all of the obligations you have as a session, but here are some of them. You're to help be responsible with the pastor for worship, right? The session's responsibilities include sacraments. So you're to decide when communion is offered and authorize it. And also nurturing a baptized member. That is your obligation, right? Once the pastor baptizes the member, you're taking on a commitment to follow up and be there and be nurturing for that family and that baptized person, child or adult, as the session. You're responsible for the education of the church from whatever ages you're doing education. So from preschool through 150, that's a session responsibility. You're responsible for receiving members, and we have several different types of members that are received. You can receive members by profession of faith. That's where they actually stand up and say, this is what I believe, right? You can receive members from another church by a letter of transfer. That's where the clerk of session, now I should say, the clerk of session does a lot of this on behalf of the session, but the clerk of session would write a letter to a congregation that somebody is coming from and say, Janet would like to transfer to this church. Would you please send us a letter saying that she's in good standing and that if she's been a ruling elder or if she's been a deacon, or that those things are the case before. So you can receive a member that way. You can receive a member by reaffirmation of faith. So where they've joined before, but they're not requesting a certificate of transfer. But those are the sessions that have that responsibility. It's the session that has the responsibility for the mission of the church. Too often I hear, well, the pastor's not out having us do X, Y, or Z. It's not the pastor's responsibility. It's the session's responsibility to figure out what should that congregation be doing out in its neighborhood and out in the country and out in the world, right? The minister, the pastor can help with it, but it's the session's responsibility. It's the session. I wish I could flag this one. It's bold, big, right? It's the session's responsibility to pass the annual budget. It is.
Amen.
Yeah, it is not the congregation's responsibility to pass the budget. You can share that budget with the congregation, but the congregation does not vote on the budget. All right, it is the session that does it. So it also means the session can change the budget if you need to change the budget. An expense you didn't anticipate came up, right? And so you anticipated you need to put $5,000 into the budget line for repairs. And then your boiler goes and you need more money and you need to borrow from your investments to do that. And you want to show that in your budget. Can you change the budget? The session can. It does not need to go back to the congregation for that kind of change. It's the session's responsibility. It's the session as well that is responsible for providing for the care of property. You cannot sell or encumber a piece of property without permission from the Presbytery on behalf of the Presbyterian Church denomination, because the property is held in trust for the PCUSA. And you can't lease a property with it for more than 5 years without permission from the Presbytery. But it is your obligation to make sure the property is being kept up. And that's part of both your fiduciary duty as a trustee and your duty under the Book of Order as an elder. It is the session's responsibility for staff hiring and dismissal. And here I'm talking about staff other than the clergy person. The clergy person is a three-way relationship between the congregation, the clergy person, and the presbytery. But it is the session's responsibility for hiring, if you have a sexton or you have an office manager or you have, that's the session as a whole that is responsible for that. It is not the session's responsibility to supervise that person. That supervision falls to your head of staff, which is usually your senior pastor. So the session should not get involved in the supervising, but the session is responsible for making sure the job descriptions for each of those people are clear and what they should and shouldn't be doing, for hiring them and for dismissing them. Often, obviously, talking with the pastor about how the work is going for those people. The session is also responsible for church administration. That means you should have a manual of operations, right? That includes a deed to your property, your bylaws, your mission statement, your standing rules, your sexual misconduct policy, your child protection policy, your position descriptions for all your staff, insurance policies, etc. Whose responsibility is it to have that manual of operation? It's not your pastors to put that together. It's the sessions to put that together and to make sure it's updated and to look at it regularly. So I know Deb is going to talk about some of the variables in a moment, and that will include that manual. But that's something you need to see and make sure as a session that you're updating as you make changes and you have new votes that may be changing some of your manual of operation. So that's it. That's a general overview of session duties. I don't know if there are questions. Any questions? Okay, then let's go on to Deb for.
I think James has a question. I can't in the chat.
The fire department has to train on violence in the workplace. We have a boundary training, which is includes like sexual harassment, violence, etc. Yes, so boundary training would be that. We do not, in this presbytery at the moment, we do not require trainings on things like anti-racism or gender equality or things like that. That's up to the individual congregation to require sexual harassment training for pastors. And
most of our congregations, are they not participating in, or some of our congregations in the New York State?
They're supposed to be doing in the congregation. Yes, they're supposed to be doing the pastors and the staff are all supposed to be doing sexual harassment training, for instance, each year.
Which is generally through your insurance provider or New York State, either one. Or that resource that I gave you, PRCLI, also offers that and will provide that. I think you have a hand up, Susan?
Yes, Priya.
Priya?
Hi, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, I had a question around, well, it was the bullet point on providing care for property. And I think, Susan, what you said was that the church can't.
Oops.
Yes, we suddenly lost you. What we heard was church can't, and then
I think we lost her altogether.
okay. All right. So Deb, why don't you start?
We'll keep an eye for her. Yeah, see if she can come back in. Okay. Zoom. Zoom. One of the challenges of doing these sort of trainings is that while Susan can definitely provide the overview and the book of order, the general rules and for a session and a congregation, our congregations vary widely. They vary widely. And there's going to be some differences in what you all have. But one of the things, and the main piece that you need to have to determine what those differences are is your bylaws. You have to have a copy of your bylaws. In some cases, you'll notice that your bylaws may not have been changed. We found this out when we all started to go Zoom. Folks learned that in order to have Zoom session meetings, it had to be in their bylaws so that they could do so. So they went and searched for their bylaws so that change might be made. So I think in 2021, I don't know this, but I think it's true that many congregations searched for and found their bylaws after decades of not even knowing that such a thing existed. So please make sure that your bylaws are going to tell you exactly how your congregation is set up, how many people are on session, how do you do your voting, et cetera, et cetera. Just some really basic things that can be variable, that are variable congregation by congregation. It's not a massive document, or it shouldn't be a massive document. But it is a very, very important one. We should have a copy of that in the Presbytery office. We will be looking at those and seeing for which congregations we do not have a copy, but it's very helpful because I would say, I don't know, Susan, you can tell me I'm wrong. I would say that 9 out of the 10 calls that you get from session clerks or from elders, one of the direct responses you have is, what do your bylaws say?
Right, and if I don't have them, I can't say, okay, here's the answer to your question.
So when you're looking for advice from the Presbytery office, we really need to have a copy of your bylaws, or certainly you do, and with the ability to send it to us so that we can help you answer questions. Some congregations have a board of deacons. Some congregations don't. That's fine, either way. I think as congregations shrunk over the decades, it became harder and harder to maintain 2 boards. So it was decided that the board of deacons would be absorbed into the session. You always have to ask yourselves, your session, who's doing this work? Who is responsible for congregational care? Remember the information that you received? And again, we'll send you a copy of these slides. But the information that you saw about what a board of deacons is to do, now who does that? Who's responsible for the congregational care in your in your congregation if you do not have a board of deacons? What you also need to have is a manual of operations. So how you have your bylaws, which sets up your congregation. How do you operate that congregation? What are your committees? What are the duties of your committees? What are your staff? What happens if there's an unhappy staff person? How many do you do annual reviews? What is the responsibility of the various committees that you have, et cetera, et cetera? What else would you see, Susan? Manual of operations.
You'd see all the articles of incorporation, usually some description of the property, so you know where your property lines are, what you own. You ideally have in there each year a budget as well to know, so that the person can go to the manual and see the budget and see where that is. All the policies, child protection, sexual misconduct, all of those things would be in there as well. Insurance policies to make sure that's covered. It's the ideal is when somebody comes on a session, you say to be able to say to the session member, you're new, here's your manual of operations. This will tell you what you need to know to be up and running as an active session member.
Again, I think what's uncovered this in the last 2 years is COVID. And when congregations or sessions have been trying to make changes or have been asking questions around preschools, who has the responsibility around the preschools, this is all the information that you will find. So again, you may have looked at it over the past 2 years. You may have changed it over the past 2 years. You really need, as a leader of this congregation and an elder of this congregation sitting on session, you need to have this. You need to have this information. Obviously, you need the budget. And Susan made it clear that you are responsible for the budget. You are responsible for voting the budget. You have that fiduciary responsibility for the church. But one of the things that we've seen since I've been here, probably even before, is that what you also need to know is, what are your reserves? Not just what is your operating budget, but what reserves does your congregation have? Does your church have? And more importantly, what restrictions are on those reserves? We have seen this time and time again, that congregations have, let's say, $500,000 in the bank called reserves, or they call it an endowment. When it's not an endowment, it depends on how it's written. So we have congregations that are struggling financially, but have that stash, that money set aside, call it an endowment, and say, we can't touch it. And we see this over and over again. You must understand, as a session member, what is your reserve? And I'll call it reserve. Is it an endowment? Is it endowed for a particular person, for a particular purpose? And what are those restrictions around that? If you have $500,000, and again, I'm using an example of a congregation that we're working with right now. And what is the restrictions on those endowments? In this particular congregation, the session, and this is one far north, small congregation, the session had imposed restrictions on the investments, on the reserves. Well, the session can unimpose those. The session can remove those. Now, you may have endowed funds. Don't get me wrong. The Presbytery does. You may, as a congregation, have endowed funds. It is legally set up for certain with certain restrictions on it and can only be used for this purpose. But you need to know that. You need to understand what the assets and reserves is of your congregation, as well as the operating budget of your church. And finally, your structure is likely very different from the structure of a session down the road, or the structure of a session up in Orange County or Putnam County. The structure of your session and your committees is likely very different. There's you could be a congregation where the chairs of the committees serve on the session. That's easy enough. The chairs of the committees, we have, obviously a average session is 6 to 9 members, and we have six committees and 2 at large. However you have structured it, you need to know how is your session structured, your particular session. I worked with a congregation in Baltimore that had a session whose only purpose was to vision. They were not to chair committees. So they were the dashboard. They were the balcony people. They were the driver of the vision and the mission. Other folks served as chairs. This was also a very large congregation, but you can set up that structure as long as you're maintaining what Susan went over this morning, any way that's workable for you. And we are seeing congregations change a lot lately based on the best way for them to govern themselves in the session and the best way to use the limited time that folks have available to them.